Hello, welcome once again to Ground Up Faith, our podcast on the basics of Christian doctrine.
Yes, today is episode 5. We are going over grace. It is God's gift that you didn't earn, but you definitely need it.
My name is Jeremy Jacoby. I am senior pastor here at Summit of Peace.
I am David Runkle. I am the assistant pastor and also seminary student at Concordia, St. Louis.
Yeah, today we're talking about one of the best words in the Christian faith. The word is grace.
I knew somebody named Grace.
You did?
She was very graceful.
My daughter's middle name is Grace.
Is it really?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, so we're talking about grace today. I really like this concept, and we're going to break it apart into two different parts here in just a moment. But there are 10 questions that we want to ask you as the senior pastor about this concept of grace that we receive from God, right? So, number one, what is grace in our context?
Right. So grace, we define usually as undeserved love or favor from God. Right. And of course, in our culture, we can use the word grace lots of different ways, right? We can say grace.
We can say grace.
We can say grace. We can say that someone is graceful, meaning they move well or something like that. But when we talk about it in terms of the Bible and what we mean in the Christian faith, grace is specifically God giving us something, right? Mm-hmm. Love and favor, particularly that we don't deserve. Mm-hmm. And we see it over and against other concepts in other religions, right? So, for example, like karma that you'd see in Eastern religions, right? People are always operating in this place of knowing, well, they don't know, but they're trying to wrestle with and figure out where they are on the balance scales, right? Have they done more good? You got to do a little bit more good than you did bad. If you do really a lot more good than bad, then you can really move up the ladder, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Come back as something better.
But Christianity comes along and says, no, it's actually about what God is doing and has done.
Mm-hmm. So this is the part that I like. It's this concept of mercy and or grace and what the two differences of those are, because sometimes they can get misconstrued or you think of them like, oh, well, I'm going to give you grace, I'm going to give you mercy. Well, what does that really mean, though?
Yeah, so mercy we usually talk about as being not getting what you deserve, right? So, for example, you do something mean to me, right? And so instead of getting retribution,
quite often,
yep,
yeah,
I don't make you pay for it or whatever, right? So you're not getting what you deserve. Grace is getting what you don't deserve.
Okay.
Right? So if mercy is the kind of removal of an obligation, grace is the giving of a gift. It's going further than just canceling a debt, right? And so when we talk about in terms of the Bible, it's not just God forgiving us, it's actually the testimony that what God is doing is actually adopting us. He's saying sin ripped you out of the family, but what I have done by grace, nothing you've deserved, brings you back into the family.
Mm-hmm. It's like that story of the prodigal son, right? Then coming back and having his arms wrapped around him. It is not what he deserved at all. He was given mercy, which is what he would have expected from the townsfolk wanted to, take him away from his father, but his father wrapped his arms around him and said, "No, I'm going to give you this grace, even though I should ostracize you now.
Right.
I'm not going to. You are now welcomed back in."
Yeah, that's perfect. Because he went there thinking, if I can just get mercy.
Yeah.
But his father went one above mercy and grace.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, in thinking about that, of the prodigal son, do I have to clean up my life in order to return back to this family of faith? We've kind of touched on this in a few of our other episodes of, well, should I clean up what I'm doing to then receive this grace?
Yeah, so the short answer is no. In fact, why don't we take a look at Romans 5 here in a second? I think that'll help us. Because the thing about grace is that it meets us there first. Grace is what begins. In fact, if we go back to the parable of the prodigal son, one of my favorite parts is that Luke tells it, is that we're told the man who's gone and abandoned his father, wasted all his money, it says, he came to his senses and remembered his father's home, mm-hmm. Right? And so what that means was that having grown up in grace, he remembered that it's available to him, right? And that's what leads him back. It's not, he didn't say, hey, if I get my life together, I'll be welcome back in my father's house, right? Yeah. He operated on what his father was doing, not what he was doing.
Mm-hmm. All right, so we were going to take a look at Romans chapter 5. This is verse number 8 here. It says, "But God showed us his love for us, in that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us." So essentially, reading that, understanding that we didn't say, while we then fixed what was wrong, then Christ died for us.
Or even, there are some Christian church bodies who view it as if it would say, knowing you would get your stuff together in the future, Jesus decided to die for you.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because what we understand is Jesus also died and is giving grace to people who are still saying no.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's not just, it's for technically every sin in the world is atoned for.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you think about it, that's where we like to lead from and understand that it's God who's acting first.
And I guess we could even say this is Prodigal Son Part 2.0, that he did it again.
Right.
Like what if he went and did it again?
Went and did it again.
Right? Like, would his father still accept him back? And in that story, yeah, every single time he would. And to even know that the father was a person to return back to, because a lot of times we don't have a father that would be as loving to give us that grace. That's not the example maybe that we received from our parental units.
Well, I was raising my hand because I don't think I would forgive my kids unlimited times.
Yeah.
Like
how many times are they going to crash the car and then you give them another car?
Yeah.
But God still does that for us. So what can I do? Can I just do whatever I want then? If I know that I can go and do what the prodigal son does, to go and spend the wealth to crash the car or whatever, I'm going to do it as many times as I want because I know in the end I'm still going to be forgiven,
right,
and I'm still going to be led into the kingdom of heaven. So let's live it up. Like, let's have a party.
Yeah. So, and this is actually a really excellent question, and it's one that the church has always kind of wrestled with because it is terrifying to say that. Just think about it as a parent if you said to your kids.
Yeah.
I mean, we do say this to them, but we're like, no matter what you do, I'm still going to always love and forgive you. And after they've done the car for the 137th time and you're still saying it, right? It's terrifying from our perspective to be like, well, they could do whatever they want.
Yeah.
Right? That's God's view on giving us free will, right? We can do whatever we want. But his love is big enough that he, number one, allows it. But the other thing I'd say about grace is our perspective is the testimony of Scripture says that if you've really received grace, like you really were broken by it, and you know what it is to restore it, you're not going to willfully do it over and over again. Now, this doesn't mean that you're not going to sometimes slip and fall and to be honest, there are people, all of us, myself included, probably will have sins we'll battle our whole life, right? But there's a difference between battling it, recognizing that we're still forgiven, but with the intention of not continuing in it, even though we do, right? And so, for example, this is a kind of one of the differences we have from Roman Catholicism, right? The idea for them is as long as you go to confession and do your acts of contrition, right? You do it over and over again, right? But that's why they also added up, this is where they got into things like, well, if we keep doing that with people, they're just going to live in chaos, right? And so then they ended up with some other teachings, right? The merits, that you can purchase, the indulgences, the things that fired up the Reformation, and just some other teachings and doctrines that worked their way in, because it is terrifying. And we have other denominations, Reformed denominations, that wrestle with the same thing, right? The if you only talk about grace, it's terrifying because then people can do whatever they want, and they might not do what you want them to do, right?
Or if they feel like, oh, if I do this, then I only have to do this to get that grace back. Like the confession you said, oh, well, the priest told me last time that I cheated on my test. It was only 3 Hail Marys.
Right.
So if it's only 3 Hail Marys, then
cheat away.
I'm good.
Right. And so with that, we kind of forget that our sin has cost someone something, right? Jesus. But again, we like to focus it from the other perspective, which is that if you truly have been in the spot like the prodigal was and been restored, then we don't see this as something you're going to be like in a rush to go do again.
Right. We should feel that repentance and wanting to have contrition and to live our lives in a different way. Because the prodigal son saw what that did to his father, right? There were tears in his eyes. And if you truly love that person and want to come back into that fold, you don't want them to feel that pain again. So the question then is, this seems a little too good to be true then, because if all I have to do is live this horrible life, but then come and apologize for it and have confession for it, I'm saved. That doesn't seem like it's enough, right? So my wife, coming from a Catholic perspective, is the one that says, well, we did all these other things, right? Like we prayed to all these other saints, we did our confessions. Like there's still a component that you have to do to receive the grace.
Right. Yeah. And the truth of the matter is, it is too good to be true, right? That's what it sounds like. And part of that is because our entire lives, every interaction we have on this planet is transactional.
Transactional.
Right? It happens with, like, I'm not going to give Costco X number of dollars in membership if they don't have it on the shelf what I want when I go there.
Or if their hot dog is not $1.50.
That's right. Right? I have an expectation. It's transactional.
I'm out of here.
We're that way in our relationships. Even the most loving and gracious human relationships still have to operate with some sort of transactional, right? Like none of us can survive in a relationship where all we do is give and the other person never ever does, right? That's just not even possible. So to come along and think that there's this divine being who will have this relationship with us and not only gives unconditionally and continually, but is the first to do it, does sound too good to be true, right? But that's actually the heart of the gospel, and we actually think that it's so contrary to this world that's one of the things that's why it changes us when we really receive it.
Yeah, I think it's like you said, it's because it is that transactional nature that we deal with in everything. It is a kind of a holdup for people to feel, well, I have to do something to receive it. That's not the way we operate, especially in this American culture, right? So why did Jesus decide to do that? What was the purpose for him to come and bestow this grace upon us?
Right. So
what's in it for him?
Yeah, well, there's nothing in it for him. He does it out of love and obedience to his Father. But it's a little bit what we talked about last week, which is there's a debt that's owed, right, because of our sin. But there's also the perfect life that is supposed to be lived. And so he comes and does both things. We talk about this, the Catechism, as active obedience and passive obedience. He was actively obedient, and then he kept the will of his Father, didn't break any commandments, loved his neighbor as himself, loved God above all things. So he kept the commandments, but he also then took the punishment for all of the ones we've broken, right, all our brokenness. And so he is the sacrifice for that, right, that atones for that, but then also he rises and restores then this to us. And so it's this free gift that he gives us. So that means what he's done is not symbolic, it's actually a substitution. That's why the fancy church word is substitutionary atonement. How's that for?
That's our $5 word of the day.
Yeah.
Substitutionary
atonement.
Should that coming across the bottom?
Yeah. And so in essence, he's paying for something that we could never afford, right? This is why there's so many parables that Jesus tells about huge debts that are owed and the people who forgive them and what that does and means for them. And then there's even the parable where one has been forgiven this huge debt and he doesn't forgive someone a little debt.
Yeah.
Right? And it shows kind of the hypocrisy in that.
Yeah. Yeah. So looking at the next question, what does grace do in somebody's life? If we have received that grace from Christ, should it change us, and what does that look like in our outpouring of our daily life?
Yeah. So in the first case, what it should do, it should give us peace, right? So if you've ever been in conflict with someone, particularly if it's something that was your fault, right? Even think back to when you were a kid, it was mom and dad or something that you did, and you were just like, oh my gosh, this is going to be terrible. Like, I remember the first accident I had, I was expecting this is going to be the end of the world, right? I was thinking about running away and becoming a hobo.
You crashed their car, didn't you?
And but instead, they forgave me. In fact, it turns out they had a rule that your first ticket and your first accident are a learning mistake.
Oh.
And so they forgave me right away. And so if you have something in your life that's like that, and you realize someone's not holding it over your head, that they really have let it go, that gives great peace. And so when we know that applies to us in our relationship with God, that's meant to give us peace. In fact, most often when the Bible talks about peace, it talks about peace coming from this knowledge of our place in God's family. It also replaces our shame with an identity, right? We're going to talk about it later on. We'll mention it here in another question, but we'll have a whole podcast where we unpack what baptism means. But what we believe now is that our first identity, when we wake up in the morning and think, who am I? We think, I'm a baptized child of God. That by grace, God has made me a part of his family. And that's how I see everything. I'm not the victim of something. I'm not the one who's supposed to bring vengeance for some other hurts or pains. We start off with that kind of identity. And then with that, it's supposed to produce the kind of things the Bible talks about: joy, love, freedom, generosity, right? Because we've been given something that we didn't deserve. And so it changes us. It leads us to want to give it out as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there's like a big part of that in working with my kids, how, they sometimes think, coming to me, oh, I'm not going to be forgiven for the thing I just did, kind of like what you were saying with your ticket or an accident. And how much more grace do they impart on others knowing that I've given them grace in this situation? For instance, Nolan spilled his milk, like right trying to reach over, it went everywhere. And he was expecting me to lash out, right? But it didn't come, right? It was just, no, get the paper towels. So then when it happened to him and his brother, when his brother spilled his juice, Nolan didn't yell at Connor, right? It was seeing that grace then passed down to others because that had been given to you. A really beautiful thing to see, because in those moments you can get angry really fast and be like, well, let me pump the brakes here because I know that I've been forgiven. Maybe I should give some of that to other people as well.
Yeah, we think grace changes who you are, not just what you do.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yeah. So the other part is, we've been going and visiting people that are hospitalized or convalescent, and maybe coming to the end of their days, that they realize that they've done a lot in their lives that they wish that they hadn't broken that relationship with their son, or that they wish that maybe they hadn't gone through that divorce or whatever that is. I now can't forgive myself because things have gone on too far and too long, and I can't get back to that place of grace. And now, maybe you're not at the end of your life, right? Maybe you're just dealing with this on an everyday struggle that I can't forgive myself.
Yeah.
Right.
And it happens a lot more than people think. Not just at the end of life. In fact, the early church fathers would call it the dark night of the soul, and they would say every Christian can have this. Lay awake at night, staring into the abyss, thinking about the past, and believe it. Can God really forgive me? I mean, this is the worst thing anybody's ever done, or whatever. And it goes back to what I mentioned in previous podcast, right? Which is the devil's the one who likes to remind us of that over and over again. But the thing we have to remember is that grace isn't based upon how we feel. It's based on God's promises.
Right.
And so this is an important concept in all of Christianity, and it can really apply to every podcast episode we have, right, as we wrestle with these kind of things. We are beings who have emotions, but our emotions are also fallen too. They don't always tell us the truth.
Right.
All you have to do is remember the first time you fell in love with a little girl on the playground, and you felt love, she didn't, and your heart's broken.
It was real, Jeremy.
Right?
We were meant to be.
Right. Or you have feelings about, just pick anything. This was the right job, this is the right thing to do, and it turns out that we're wrong. So we have to remember our feelings can be wrong, so we base it on God's promises, right? Mm-hmm. And so forgiveness isn't achieved, it's received.
Yeah.
So really what we're just saying is you don't need to forgive yourself. In fact, that'd be one of the kind of lies that the devil would tell us as well, right? Because who we've harmed are other people, and who restores us is God.
Or even if we do forgive ourselves, maybe they haven't.
Right. Well, that could be too.
And that we feel that we need both of those to be in connection to then receive the grace from God.
Yeah.
Oh, I've reconciled this with this person. Now I can receive the grace.
Right.
Well, that's not always going to... Everything doesn't get wrapped up in a nice little bow. But what God is saying is it doesn't have to be, because I've already given it to you.
Right. Yeah. I mean, we'll talk in future podcasts about kind of living life together, and there should be reconciliation between brothers and sisters who've hurt each other, stuff like that. But in terms of how God sees us, right, even if they're not forgiving us, God is forgiving us when we are repentant.
Yeah, that's an awesome thing to hear. Okay, so then how do I receive that grace if I would like it? I've heard good things about it. How am I going to receive it?
Yeah, so we talk about it as faith, as trusting, right? And so if we go back to the first podcast, it's intellectual assent to the facts. Jesus is God's son who died for you and rose again. And on account of that, he offers you a new life, adopted into the family of God. You're given an intellectual assent. I believe that's a true statement. But farther than that is then you trust it, right? It is the thing that gives you peace, that you let go of your sins. You do fall asleep after the dark night of the soul and say, you know what, God's got this, and it's been taken care of. And so that's kind of the way we do it. But God is actually really specific in his Bible. He talks about, and we'll have our own podcast on this, the means of grace. It's the method by which he gets us, delivers his grace, right? So if you want to think about it this way, let's say you're playing with the kids out in the yard and you want to have a water fight. Mm-hmm. Well, what are all the different means that you could pelt your kids and get them wet?
Squirt guns.
Squirt guns.
Water balloons?
Water balloons.
The hose?
The hose itself.
Yeah.
Yep. And so what we talk about is that God has different means by which he gets his grace. And so we talk about those as baptism, talk about it in the Lord's Supper, which we'll unpack in a podcast, but we also talk about it through his word. His word itself, it delivers his grace. And so that's how we receive it, right? And so this goes back to what we talked about last week. That's why we encourage people to be reading their Bible, to be in church. In our podcast, that when we talk about confession and absolution, I'll say more about this, but it's one of the reasons that in our church, when you get together, every single week, we talk about our sin and the forgiveness we receive. And some people don't like that. They grew up in tradition where it's like, why are you, just tell me like the 5 best ways to be financially healthy, or the 3 best ways to be a husband. And those things can have their place as well. But we also need to be reminded constantly of God's grace. Because when we're out in the world, again, switches back to being transactional.
Yeah, we don't always hear that in other contexts in our corporate world, that we are given that grace. And so if we don't hear that on Sunday, when and where are we going to hear that? So that it is something that I like about our Lutheran faith and our liturgy that we've had for over 500 years now, that we do have that confession and that absolution of here are my sins, and they are forgiven.
They're forgiven.
And I have received that grace from God. And it's great to hear every week. Yeah. So here's a question that I see. I watch a lot of debates online as I'm going through my studies. And one of them that I've heard that I thought was kind of an interesting concept to unpack or talk about is, can I lose that grace? Once it has been given to me, can I ever lose it?
Right. Yeah, so we talk about this as, sometimes you'll hear it as once saved, always saved. And from our perspective, again, as Lutherans, that's not what the Bible teaches. It comes from John Calvin, who was a fellow reformer of Martin Luther's. They disagreed on a number of things. That's why there's 2 different church bodies that come from them, the Reformed Church and the Lutheran Church. And this is one of them, because of John Calvin's reading of Scripture, particularly that everything God wants to have happen happens. Basically, he says no one would fall away because God doesn't want them to fall away, so that means they wouldn't. But we take it that and say, no, there's still free will involved. And so, yes, you can get off the bus, and God will not yank you back on.
Yeah.
Right? And so people could lose their faith for different ways. They can have stuff that challenges them in their life. We also believe that if you persistently, if you persist in deliberate sin, not again like we talked about last time where we know we'll struggle with it, but if you're like, you know what, I just am going to decide I'm going to be an addict my whole life, and that's just...
I'm just going to do it.
I'm just going to do it, right?
Yeah.
Or I'm going to continue to lie or cheat on my spouse or whatever it is. Persistent sin can actually kill your faith. It can smother it, right? Is in essence what we believe. So you can walk away from it. But again, God always invites us back, right? And so I think in some ways people are... maybe that's what they're experiencing now. Although I would suggest, in my experience, most people have never gone as far as they really think they have. You know what I mean? They may have thought they abandoned the faith, but what they abandoned was the practicing of it. But they still had moments, dark night of the soul, where they turned to God or something like that.
Or the practicing of it to what maybe their parents or their family expects them.
Respect them of, yeah.
Right, because, well, we don't see you going to church every Sunday, so maybe you really should, well, Grandma, I'm going when I go, but I'm not going every week, right?
Right.
Yeah, to what we were talking about in a few weeks earlier is that, God didn't make just robots and automatons, right? And it'd be one thing to say, okay, I've made this robot and the robot believes and will always believe. Well, like you said, that free will is that you can get off the bus, but going back to the prodigal son analogy, the dad will always welcome you back, right? You can always get back on the bus and turn around and come back. That is always, that grace is always there.
Right.
That once you have stepped away, are you forever stepped away? No, you can always come back, and we want you to come back. And that's a great thing to hear as well.
Yeah. And in fact, I just thought of this when you were saying it. Like, if you think about it right now, AI is this gigantic thing in this world. And what's everyone's greatest fear about it?
It's going to take over the world.
It's going to be able to make decisions against what we tell it.
Yeah.
It's going to have free will. And that just kind of, once again, emphasizes that that's a terrifying thing from God's perspective, right? To have been able to give us this. But it's also why... when he acts in this gracious way, it demonstrates just how much he loves us.
Yeah. Well, that's all we had, our 10 questions of grace, where it comes from, why we have it, how we can get it. We hope that was helpful in unpacking that for you. We hope that you come back here next week as we are going to be talking about baptism, how we receive that grace, and what we as a Lutheran confession of faith believe in, how baptism is, how we're supposed to do it, with
what it means, all the kind of stuff. Yep.
Do we do it to adults, kids, all the questions.
All the stuff.
So we'll unpack that next time.
All right, don't forget to like, subscribe, share, comment.
We're never going to get it.
We're not going to get it in the same order.
We're not going to do it.
All
Also,
right.
if you'd like to see any of our other sermon series or any of our other videos, you can always check those out. Leave a comment. We would like to respond back if you have anything you'd like us to comment on. And as always, you can find us here at summitofpeace.org.
Wherever you are in your story, God's grace is for you.
All right.
Thanks
Take care.
for-
God
thanks for
bless.
watching.